Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. We are continuing our coverage of the federal takeover of DC's Metropolitan Police Department. National Guard troops are officially on the streets of DC right now, along with federal agents. And city leaders are saying the action is unnecessary, and some are calling it dangerous. Even as DC officials cry foul, President Trump is doubling down, calling DC crime-ridden and out of control. As more officers and agents take to the streets of Washington, what can and can't they do? What are your legal rights if you're stopped by an officer, guard, or agent? We are hitting this issue from all sides. We have legal experts and community activists to help us get beyond the fear and confusion and to the knowledge. My guests are civil rights attorney Donald Temple, Darius Baxter, founder and CEO of Good Projects, A. Scott Bolton, criminal defense attorney and political analyst, and Ron Moten, community activist and owner of the DC Go-Go Museum. Thank you all so much for joining the conversation. I want to get right to some of these issues. Scott, what exactly does a federal takeover of DC police mean in legal terms? Scott, can you hear me? What exactly does a federal takeover of DC police mean in legal terms?
Well, if you look at the executive order, you got to start with the executive order. The executive order doesn't specifically say this is a federal takeover. What the president does in his emergency powers after 30 days or so is he is in a position to delegate or to direct the National Guard to support the DC Police Department, to be a federal partner, if you will. The order is very specific, and after 30 days, if he wants to withdraw them from the streets or from supporting the police department, or if he has to go to Congress, normally he has to go to Congress to get that extended, that's within his powers to do so. But what's misleading about what the media, as well as Donald Trump, the administration, is saying, is that somehow that he's in control of this police department. I don't believe that's the case. I believe that you see that the mayor and the government officials are talking about federal partnership, these additional resources, and really using those resources to really bring crime down even further. Now, they've got to thread the needle, though, right? Because this administration and the House and Senate are all Republicans. They can take home rule. Secondly, they also have to approve this Redskins Stadium deal. And so you mean
the Commanders?
The Commanders, forgive me.
Go ahead.
They've got to approve this deal. And so the mayor, unlike any other mayor of any major city or red or blue city, she's in a really different space right now. And so legally, I think what she's going to do is try to use them as our federal partners effectively and efficiently to bring crime down and to work with them, because she really politically and legally has no choice.
Yeah, but that kind of goes to the heart of a lot of what was said yesterday, when you even talk about the language that the mayor and specifically Chief Paula Smith was making reference to federal partners. That is not what was coming from the White House yesterday. That is not what came from the Trump administration, specifically the president today. Scott. So, while we're trying to get Scott squared away, Donald, your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, it isn't what it appears to be. You know, when we're looking at these different machinations, for example, this whole notion of public safety in the District of Columbia, and the perception that the natives are out of control and you can't walk the streets and there's not safety at the tourist sites, the tanks at the monuments and the like, it's actually misleading, and misleading by design. In part, this is a ploy where we're using DC as a means to another end. And you can do that. So we do. We have two issues. We have the politics of what's going on, and we have the reality of what's going on. I mean, when we talk about crime being out of control and we're assigning the National Guard here to work with the DC police, that did not happen on January the 6th. So
Right.
let's keep context and reality and standards of public safety and reality on one hand. And so, to the extent that, as Scott has pointed out, that as per the language of the executive order, the intention is to work conjunctively or collaboratively or cooperatively with the District of Columbia Police. And that's what we're hearing from the mayor. And of course, we're hearing that from the mayor. But what is really at issue? Is it this one of three things? Is it something to distract the nation from a larger question, the looming Epstein case? And now everyone's eyes are on DC, which is like a mosquito fighting a lion in this particular situation? Or is it something akin to the control of the District of Columbia, which has been another subject and another issue? The District of Columbia, which has 750,000 citizens and a society where people live and have values, where there are people that live, people are not running amok here in the District of Columbia. We have problems indeed. Or is it, in fact, as Scott pointed out, is it even pressure to behind something as simplistic as the stadium or naming the Commanders the Redskins? We don't know. But what we do know is that by law, for the next 30 days or so, we have this presence and we have issues related to this presence that politically and legally we have to manage. What I think would have been more productive and constructive if the issue really was public safety, and at times we have to admit there are public safety issues in the city. We've all seen them and experienced them. There may be the nature of the effort should be something akin to a dialogue, a roadmap, something that's serious, something that's focused on the problem and how we resolve the problem and not merely react to a problem that's deeply rooted. So I think that some substance of that is that we don't know what is in that crystal ball of the administrations and what they're looking at. They have a better sense, but what we do know is that it is of concern.
Ron, from your perspective, what impact do you believe that this is going to have on, the community that you were closest with, like the folks east of the river, Ward 7, Ward 8? We've seen some of this movement downtown around the National Mall, uptown. But what do you think the impact will be for, the part of the city where there are the most Black people and young people?
I would first say this. One of the things I want to be clear: if we were to put troops somewhere based upon violence and things that are happening in America right now, it wouldn't be DC, it wouldn't be Philadelphia, it would be Alabama. It would be places like that we don't control, right? That our policies that I often conflict with here in DC are not necessarily worse than what's going on in places like Alabama that are being totally neglected, right? So we know that there's a bigger picture. As far as Southeast, I'm here in Southeast right now, and I feel perfectly safe, right? A lot of the crime and things that go on are situational. Like if somebody's in public housing, for instance, and where guys have conflicts with each other, or you might go out on a Navy Yard while young people have meetups and things like that. But these are things that we can control ourselves. And because of policymakers in DC, people who have common sense approaches on crime, on punishment, and etc., have been left out of the equation. And because we've gotten away from common sense approaches, it puts people in my community in danger. When they passed the marijuana law in DC, I went to the guy with the little silly hat that does all the referendums, me and Ivan Cloyd, and asked him, could they put an education component in it before it passed? They told us that was their interest. I knew what their interest was. It was just about white people making money off of marijuana. No black people got the dispensaries. No black people were educated. So more people were locked up after the bill passed than before the bill. And they said this was what the bill was all about, stopping black people from getting records. So part of what's happening here in D.C. is not just because of Donald Trump. Part of what's happening in D.C. is because people don't listen to people who care about black people and not follow national policies. That's my opinion. So right now, yeah, some of these young people might try one of these police officers, but hopefully the police officers that encounter our young people will be like that guy that was explaining to a guy on his porch that he couldn't smoke marijuana outside versus beating him upside his head. So I hope and pray that more of our young people encounter situations like that, because they don't know that you can't smoke marijuana outside. They don't know a lot of the things that they should know or might have been. I had a parent call me that told me her child was locked up down Navy Yard with a gun and told me that she tried to keep him locked up and they put him back on the street. Her other son was robbing people in Northwest. And I'm telling you, I'm somebody who worked in the trenches. I'm somebody that worked with killers. And I'm telling you, our city council has let us down. We let these people from outside of our city come in our city and tell us to get away from what our grandmothers used to do in raising our babies. And it does not work. And then we're paying a price and is against the will of the people.
Let me ask you this, Darius. I know you posted on social media yesterday that you were going to have a meeting with the mayor. Did you have that meeting? And if so, what happened?
Yes, we were. We had the opportunity to meet with the mayor's chief of staff yesterday, along with her community engagement team and other members of her cabinet, to just talk about, to Ron's point, just common sense approaches to how we solve the issue around youth-based violence, with a particular focus on the Navy Yard and the wharf areas. One of the things that is not talked about enough, and I know that politicians in this city, both at the local level and the federal level, are aware of this. We demonize young people so often for the behaviors that they exude when they find themselves in places. And even the president himself mentioned the Navy Yard. And I'm located here currently in the area. I'm here in Southwest. We talk about these young people gathering unsafely, but we don't talk about what are the alternatives to them. We know the Department of Parks and Recreation, who we've had the opportunity to partner with for the last several years, has implemented a product with their late night hype, but that only happens every few weeks. Young people are looking for activities to do, particularly when we talk about the summer months, every single day, and there's not enough opportunities. I know Ron has worked very closely with a group that all of us should be familiar with, Check It Enterprises. This is not the first time in this city that we've seen young people gathering that has resulted in violent behavior when there's not enough for them to do. But looking at Check It Enterprises as a case study and a pure win for this city, when you provided the young people investment, when you provided them opportunities to lead in their own destination, in their own journey, and to fulfill the dreams that they have for themselves, you don't hear about Check It anymore, particularly in the Gallery Place has since long been an area where young people are gathering and exuding violent behaviors. And these were the type of conversations that we were having with the mayor's team yesterday. What places and spaces do we have on a consistent basis, and what type of investments are not being happen through pass-throughs, even through an organization like Good Projects, but what direct investments are happening and what spaces are being specifically created for young people to gather and gather safely?
But Scott, here's my other question. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah, here's my question, and I may have to cut you off to take the break and we can continue on the other side. But if a young person encounters one of these federal agents and there is an uncomfortable or physical altercation, what legal rights do they have?
Well, they certainly, hopefully the federal agent is trained in police work, because you're a federal police officer doesn't mean you're trained as a beat cop or even know how to arrest. And so that's going to take time for them to do training. Secondly, I would urge all of our young people, as difficult as it is to be fully cooperative, keep your ID on you, and get through that process. If you're going to be arrested, you're not going to convince the officer not to arrest you. So you got to go. You get a phone call, you don't talk, you want to speak to a lawyer, and you got to get through the process. You may spend a couple of days in jail before arraignment because of the number of judges that we do not have. That's a federal issue as well as city council issue, but you got to be cooperative, right? If you are abused, right? Remember the badge number, remember the face, right? But you cannot fight the police. They don't have a right to commit a crime in arresting you, right? But you're not going to solve that issue on the street. You got to get through the system and then get a good lawyer. But let me say this about the police.
Well, hold that point. Hold that point. Don't forget your point. I've got to take a real quick break. We want to remind our listeners that you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next. That's on WHUR. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the federal takeover of DC's Metropolitan Police Department. We are looking at the legal and community issues. My guests are Darius Baxter, founder and CEO of Good Projects, Ron Moten, community activist and owner of the DC Go-Go Museum, also civil rights attorney Donald Temple, and A. Scott Bolden, criminal defense attorney and political analyst. Scott, before the break, you were making a point. Please continue.
I just want to touch on Darius's point. We know that more police and more arrests don't work. DC has the highest arrest record or arrests per capita than any other major urban center, right? We have more police officers, federal and local police officers, and university police and executive agency police than any other urban center. So more police and more arrests isn't going to solve the problem. You can lock people up and we still have crime, right? We know from studies that it's a continuum of care of our young people, giving them alternatives to violence if they're born into a drug culture or violence culture, giving them jobs, job training, community service, churches, public-private partnerships. A continuum of all of these things means that you're going to have crime that goes down and not up. But just locking them up and letting them out, or even if they stay there, right? Giving up on young people is not the answer. In fact, you get a different result if that's your total focus on law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Donald, let me ask you this, because we know that there is a way to address this issue prior to this week, and hopefully this is still the case. If a DC police officer assaults you, does you wrong, whether it's a small thing or a big thing, there is a process to address this with the government of the District of Columbia. But what happens, Donald, when a federal officer, particularly in this case, if something happens? I mean, let's just be honest. I think one of the biggest fears, and even the mayor mentioned this during her town hall meeting last night, that there is the fear that something is going to go terribly left when we have these federal agents on the street. Turn your microphone on, please, Donald.
Yes,
go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, let me try to delineate. One of the things that's not being discussed in many of the commentaries and discussions on this federal presence in DC. The law is this. In the United States, if there is a police action here, DC, Maryland, New York, where there's state, color of state law, you can bring a federal civil rights claim, 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, against the officers. But if such an incident involves the United States Park Police, a federal agency police officer, the National Guard, the FBI, you cannot. What that means then, and there's a Supreme Court case that our community needs to know about, and it's Bivens, Bivens versus 6 unknown named agents of Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And the court basically, you don't have a constitutional right. You have an implied an implied claim under the potentially under the Fourth and Fifth Amendments in these situations. But then the court, the United States Supreme Court, has narrowed the instances when you can bring such claims. So you don't have a broad brush basis if you're arrested by comparison. If a DC police officer arrests you and assaults you with their aspartame or shoot you, it's different because it's a civil rights violation along with the state claims. If it happens with a federal police officer, it's way different and much more difficult to establish a direct constitutional violation. But you do have what's called the Federal Tort Claims Act. And that's a whole different process where you would file a claim for a tort, an assault or battery or false arrest and the like. And then you have the opportunity or the right after that's exhausted. And I think there's a 2-year statute of limitations on that to bring a claim in federal court. The damages are different under the Federal Tort Claims Act than under the constitutional claims. Are you talking, Harold?
You're on mute.
Pardon me. Thank you so much. Let me ask you this, Ron. What are your biggest concerns right now as we are seeing this federal presence in D.C.?
Well, my thing is you make the best of every situation. Mm-hmm. What we should be doing is talking to our young people, filling the gaps that we haven't been filling in, right? And I think DC has more programs than anywhere in the country. So it's not for lack of programs. I also think that DC has the highest entitlement syndrome in the country. A lot of people in DC think somebody owes them something. They don't have to do nothing. They don't have to take the programs, and then they blame everybody.
Yeah, but let me, the thing I'm asking about, I'm not talking about what has happened. I'm talking about what's happening right now.
Right. So what I say is when the programs and people come, people have to take the programs. People have to take the help. And if people don't take the help, then there has to be actions so that we don't have to have these people in our backyard or in our front yards. It has to be balanced. And there's a such thing as love and order. It doesn't have to always be law and order, but we have to have love and we have to have order. So my thing is, how do we balance this out so that you don't have children with multiple carjacks and multiple robberies? There's only a small group of people that's causing this. 99.9% of our children are doing what's right, but just a few people can cause total chaos, because what's happened is not that black people are getting robbed. They start robbing the wrong people for the last 3 years. And that's why we're here today having this conversation.
But you know what? But I gotta say, the wrong people. What I don't know if that means.
Well,
let me just clarify the wrong people.
They go to
It's simple. He's saying white people.
Yeah, but I want to say this to that notion. I think the question posed to Ron is a deeper question, but a lot of the reactions and thinking that we have is dated. It's antiquated.
Why do you say that?
This is 2025, and this problem that we see with these young people, which is real, and we know it's real, is not just rooted in superficial, traditional, archaic ways that we do things. We have to be innovative, and we know these kids, if you're in the schools, they don't have the resources in the schools. The family structures are not what they should be. I had a conversation with the late Marion Barry about this subject 25 years ago. And the very issue of how do we manage this problem? And it's really rooted in discipline and values. And Ron, you call it love. We put love as the umbrella over that. But then we have to find ways. And this is a robust city, 750,000 people, $22 billion budget, a strong leadership team, but basically drinking from old vessels of wine. We have to find new ways to deal with our young people, to motivate and inspire them. We have technology. We have an incredibly well-educated community and talented community. and richly diverse community. And I think we just need to rethink what we do. And that may mean some things that we haven't thought about yet.
Well, let me ask you this, Darius, because I think both what Ron and Donald are saying kind of go to the heart of what we've just seen, such as that crowd rush of that convenience store over there off of Benning Road at Heckinger Mall. And in the interviews that we've seen this week, one of the ladies was saying, and this is such an important piece, if children are hungry, because they were stealing, chips and stuff like that, she said, I will give them food. But she said they were just wreaking havoc. And I think that there needs to be a tough love conversation, because sometimes, certainly, there is a lot of them when we're talking about this occupation of this federal takeover. But you know this just as well as anything. Sometimes it is us. And what does that us conversation look like from your perspective, Derek?
Well, Harold, I think that's an amazing question, and I think it's the right question. Over the course of the last decade, as I pushed into my career, I've prided myself on waking up every single day asking, how do I dismantle systems of inequality? And we're particularly having this moment in time right now, and let's just call a spade a spade. This is not a law and order issue. This is a racial issue. This is an attack on the Black community here in the District of Columbia. If our population was 70% Caucasian, we wouldn't be having these conversations. But I preface with that for a reason, right? Because I talk about priding myself on breaking down systems of inequality. Mm-hmm. And over the last 10 years, very often the rooms that I find myself in, the conversations are the man, them. How do we, and obviously during the era of 2020, with issues around racial equity, the conversation continued to push forward farther and farther. But I've grown up here in Washington, D.C. I have a Washington, D.C. birth certificate. I went to college here in Washington, D.C. I continue my journey as a social entrepreneur here in Washington, D.C. And all along that path, and I think we all can agree with this experience, the person sitting across from me more often than not that has been perpetuating this system hasn't been somebody of an opposite race. It's been somebody that looks exactly like me. I've grown up in a city with a Black mayor. I've grown up in a city with Black council members. I've grown up in a city with Black police officers. I've grown up in a city with Black bankers, Black doctors, Black lawyers, as highlighted by this conversation. And all along the way, we continue to see DC continuing to have one of the highest levels, particularly of income inequality in the country, right? Who do we truly have to blame? So to your question, Harold, I'm deeply concerned about where we are as a city, and for a host of different reasons, right? Like, the issues that we're seeing with young people isn't one that was created because it wasn't one that was created in the last 2 decades by a white person. It was one that was created in the last 2 decades from the top, not having enough accountability for young people so that when they're going into convenience stores and they're doing those things, that they don't have a fear of reprimand as it relates to the law. That they know I'm going to be in prison or I may be detained for a day or two, but then I'll be right back on the street. And it's unfortunate we actually live in an era of time right now where having an ankle monitor on is actually a badge of honor. Not being able to read or write, but having an ankle monitor on is the same as having a gold chain for a young person, right? And on the other side of that, we used to live in an era where if a young person did something wrong, and I feel like very much so, I was the last generation of this, you heard this village concept, that it wasn't one person that was telling that young person to do the right thing. You had your neighbor, you had your aunt, your uncle, you might get a whooping from at least 15 different people. And we're living in an era right now where even take the 15 people out of it, we have parents that don't even want to parent. There's so many young people in this city that are raising their siblings now because parents have said that I'm giving up, right? So bump a village. We don't even have parents that are stepping in for their young people. So if you're a young person, and let me finish my point, A. Scott. Okay. So you have young people that are growing up in this city with zero accountability. And then we have an expectation for them to do the right thing. And that's not a recipe for success in the long term.
Yeah, but that identifies the problem. But then how do we fix this problem? You have listen, my grandmother used to say, that boy ain't got good upbringing. We all know what that means, right? You got parents who don't want to parent. You got babies having babies, growing up in an environment of drugs and crime, the least, the lost, the left out, as Man Barry used to say, and yet we're not reaching them. That's the identification of the problem. How do we reach them so that we give them alternatives to drugs and violence and chaos, if you will?
I would strongly disagree with that. And you heard me talk about the case study earlier when we talk about Checkered Enterprises as a success story in this city. We had, and at that time, we're not just talking about
that's anecdotal. I agree with
that's not anecdotal. That's quantitative. That's quantitative. And I'm not just talking about the Checkered Enterprises wasn't a group of young people gathering in the Navy Yard jumping each other. That was people getting stabbed and robbed. That was a very violent period in the city when you talk about youth violence. And to Ron's point, with little to no investment, you had a group of community organizers that came together, leading with the umbrella of love, and they were able to turn the trajectory of those young people around to the point that they're now a national success story. Young people in this city have, when given opportunities, make the right decisions. And Good Projects is a living example of that.
I think that's true.
I don't disagree
I think that's
with
true.
you. I'm saying there's just not enough opportunities for them, or they're not taking advantage of it. Because if you got young kids carjacking, and that's real.
Scott, you don't have, that's very generalized and stereotypical when we talk about young people.
I think statistics bear that out.
No. Let me make the point.
Go ahead, Donald. Make your point.
Is that, you would think, based on what you just said, is that there are thousands of young people who are doing these crimes, et cetera, et cetera. We have thousands of kids in the city, and there are many, 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 many very good kids who want to do great things.
With you. Why do you
so we have to
contextualize? Good kids.
But we have to contextualize. We have to contextualize it, because to the extent that there are kids that come within the zone of doing these crimes and things like that, the question that is posed, that you posed, and it's a correct question. We've identified the issue. Then what is it that we do? And what we have failed to do is we have failed to resolve this recurring problem because we're too traditional in our analysis. And we spend a lot of money on things that really don't deal with the problem. If you have a malignant cancer, then you got to deal with the problem of the cancer. You can't deal with the symptom of the cancer. And in our community, we got people right here with here and within the range of our voices that could come together, that have not come together to be collaborative and cooperative, whether it's in the church, whether it's in the fraternities, and whether it's in the sororities, but we have not come together and be strategic. And so the bump that we're getting, in part because of our political situation, is this notion that somebody can come and say, look, you're not doing it, so we can do it. And so what we have to do is not yet been developed. But why aren't we coming together? We're waiting for the mayor, the city council to tell us what to do with the children. Some of these parents have got to come together. Some of these people have got to come together, and they have to make the personal sacrifice and the commitment. What's not being said, too, is that the culture has changed. Whether we like it.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
By what I mean, by what everyone is thinking something, but what they're thinking, is a product of what they're hearing, what they're learning, what they're spending their time with on their phones, what they're seeing in terms of the programming and the information. That is being dominated by folk outside of our communities significantly. And so violence in the American. Let me finish this point.
You're still talking about the problem. Give me the top 3 solutions to crime in the District of Columbia. Whether you're talking about young people or old people, anybody, right? Give me your top 3 solutions.
I can give you the top 3 solutions.
Anybody
First,
on this panel.
And like I shared, man, and if for all of our listeners out there, I encourage them to go to goodprojects.org. First is cutting the snake off at the head. One of the reasons why we've invested deeply into particularly the age group of 6 to 12 years old, because by the time a young person gets to high school, if they're not on grade level, particularly in math and reading, then they have a very high propensity to begin to commit crimes and obviously not be a productive member of society. The second thing is providing workforce, particularly to our teens and young adults. We talk about the criminalization of teens and young adults with a particular focus on Black males in the city so often, but we don't talk enough about workforce and what does that pathway to the middle class look like for them. There's a lot of investments going into a lot of different people, and particularly in the time when we saw immigrants coming into the city, we made sure that they were housed, we made sure that they had transportation. Where was that same level of intention and investment into people that were growing up here? And the third thing is love. And it sounds like a trope, but I mean that. There's a lot of programs that exist in this city. And Ron, I know you're familiar with several of them, but a lot of them, if you go in there, you're felt to feel less than every single day. And who wants to participate in something like that? The reason Check-It Enterprises was successful, the reason Good Projects is successful is because when a young person comes in, the first thing they're looking for is a hug and they know they'll get it. How many safe places like that exist in Washington, D.C.? Honestly, I can name less than 10. And we have to continue to expand those types of opportunities for young people.
Ron, you were about to make a comment. Go ahead.
I want to say that, yes, I agree with the brother who said we got to be innovative and we have to change. Things that worked in the past, some of them won't work now. Some of them will work. The problem I have with all of this in Washington, D.C., we always letting people from out of town come in our city and tell us how to deal with our children, but we mad that Donald Trump is here telling us what to do. If you just listen to people who work in the community and work, we had the Pizzaholics, and it worked, but the politics got rid of that. Politics destroyed that. We sent 169 children to college, broke 40 truces, created policy and strategies to deal with it, and they still trying to duplicate that, right? But the reason why this is not working is because we didn't look at it as a job. It was a ministry, and people are not spiritual in the work anymore. People are scared of parents. They scared to tell people what they need to say. I didn't care what you said about me. I knew the difference between telling the person in the community what was citizenship and what was snitching. And I stood on it. You got too many people trying to be cool as the children are. And I'm not trying to be cool. I'm trying to get results, and I'm trying to help the community. And if people don't stand on that and they don't do the work as a ministry, they cannot connect to these type of children that we're talking about walking around with AK-47s, and the internet is training them to be who they are. So, and it has to be a strategy, and the people who doing the work have to have a moral compass. We cannot expect the children to change if the people who doing the work don't have a moral compass.
Donald, I need to ask you this question because, again, and all of these points are really important, but I want to make sure that we don't lose focus, because right now some would say, and, kind of, contextualizing what the mayor was saying in her town hall last night, where she was saying we must protect the District of Columbia. But I would submit, Donald, there is protecting the District of Columbia, and now that may move to defending the District of Columbia, not only from this takeover of the police, but also the politics that could be coming down the road regarding statehood. The president said today, DC statehood is not going to happen.
Oh, I mean, listen, I worked on the Capitol Hill between 1980 and 89. I worked with Congressman Dellums when he chaired the committee. I was senior counsel there. I worked with Walter Fauntleroy and the like. But I think that Walter Fauntleroy's efforts were instructive, leading to home rule, and guys like Johnny Barnes, who are around, played a role in that. We're not calculated in our politics. I mean, we know it's not folly that it's not something far-fetched that these guys want the District of Columbia. But if they want it, that's real. Then what do? The problem is, I think we sit on our hands. We think that this is a figment of our imagination, not just what's happening in DC, but what's happening overall. And, we're partying, laughing, joking, going to the games, and life as usual. That's a problem. And if we're talking about the District of Columbia, we know that to take the District of Columbia, they would have to rescind the Home Rule Act. That's an act of Congress. And there are dynamics in that particular process that we need to be sensitive to. People need to understand that the District of Columbia is a dynamic city. It's not some city where people are running around tearing down the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington monuments. People are enjoying a very high quality of life, and there's a dynamic bit of interaction, there's education, etc. And in the African American community and Latino communities, there are vibrant, dynamic activities that are uplifting people. So what we have to do is get the message out that the District of Columbia is not some hole somewhere where people can't walk outside and go get an ice cream cone or go to the museum or go to the university. That's not the case. It's extreme. We have a problem. We have to address it. I would add too, if I may, I'm going to say something that ain't going to be popular. And this is what I did speak to Marion Barry about, because I have a kid right now that I took under my wings that I represented the family. And this kid, I won't mention his name, was charged with a gun weapon, and he beat it, Ron. He beat it. 3 weeks later, what happened, Ron?
Ron, you turn your microphone on, please. 3 weeks.
What happened, Ron? 3 weeks later, after he beat the charge, he was charged with another charge. And the problem is that these young people are in the same environments, in the same dynamics are going on and on and on in their households, with their families, things that we know that we just are not articulating. It's overwhelming. My view is that we got to get young people, get a place for them, and get them out of the city, and let some people who know what the hell they're doing in terms of what some of this discussion is, in terms of skill set, in terms of mindset. Some of those guys might be guys that have done time. We got a lot of guys who are dynamic, that done time, and they can communicate in ways that some of us can't. Some of them are military guys. When my father in Philly was giving my grandfather a problem, he sent my father to my grandfather's farm.
Can I just want to make one point to that though.
Real quick.
I agree with everything what you're saying, but my issue is, and it's not just on this conversation, but it's happened a lot throughout this conversation over the course of the last few weeks, even prior to the president's announcement, is how we contextualize young people in this city, as if they are they were just dropped off, right? Young people are products, to your point, of their environments. And you mentioned the analogy around cancer. Cancer spreads. Young people are products of households. Those households are products of the communities. Those communities are products of the schools, right? And if we continue to look at it as if, all right, there's only a few bad actors, and if we get them off the street, that all the problems will be solved, then we're going to be having the same conversation in 20 years. Because these same young people are going to have children. And a lot of us know the statistics around it. Low-income populations often have more children than your higher earners, particularly in a place like Washington, D.C., right? These are much bigger issues. These are issues as it relates to our schools. These are issues as it relates to what roles churches are playing in communities. There's a lot of work that we have to do. And if we continue to just put the blame on young people and say that the young people have to develop, then Harold, we're going to be talking about this, not just for the next 30 days, but for the next 30 years.
Yeah, I agree. And the young people are not the problem. They are part of the problem. And it is multi-layered. I can't
let us in that, because I do not believe that the young people themselves are the problem. The young people are the product of the problem. They're a symptom of a much larger issue in this city.
I've got 1 minute. Scott, can you hear me? Yeah, we're still having a connection issue with Scott, unfortunately.
I'm here now.
Oh, okay. Real quick, 30 seconds. My question to you before I wrap this up is that we've done a lot of talking about our responsibility and the problems, and that certainly is important, and it is very, very valid. But now, do you believe that what the Trump administration is doing is showing the district a common enemy and a reason to unite to, as I said, defend the District of Columbia? Real quick.
Which administration? I'm sorry.
The Trump administration. What is happening right now?
Well, you've got to be a trusted partner in order to say we can work together. And this administration is not trustworthy. The problem for the Democrats, though, whether it's here or elsewhere, is that that this crime problem, right? There are Black families and Black residents who've been victims of crime, and they want to lower the crime rate. They want to feel safe. It's one thing to say the statistics are down, but if you don't feel safe, whether it's perception, rightfully or wrongfully, and so the Democrats have got to thread the needle on this message, because you can say, well, this is Trump being Trump, maybe, but additional resources to keep crime down and to make people feel safe, that's real. And how do you reject that? How you implement it is the key, but how do you reject additional resources to make people feel safe in DC or any other major urban center? You ought to welcome it and manage it.
I'm out of time, guys. Thank you so much for your input. I'll be calling on you again, because certainly this does not appeal that it is going to appear that it's going away anytime soon. That is the Daily Drum for Wednesday, August 13th. I'm Harold Fisher.